This is a picture from the and this is a picture from the. Take a good hard look and keep it ingrained in your head. Which one do you prefer? Now, here is a video from the. Here is a video. Which do you prefer? Because by the end of this video, you're going to find out which phone took which photo and video, and which phone I think is the camera king. Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and this is the Pixel 6 Pro. And like MKBHD, I've been using it for like the past week. Now, like any Pixel, the thing that intrigued me the most with this phone was this camera over here. But before we get to that camera test, I kind of want to give you a short opinion on this phone because there were some other things that this year specifically intrigued me about the Pixel 6 Pro that Google is now doing for the first time. Now, full disclosure, Google did send me this phone as part of their Team Pixel program. They did not pay me for this video or for this review, and they have not seen this video in advance or had any input in its making. Now, the Pixel 6 Pro retails for $899 for 128 gigabytes of starting storage, which is the model that I'm using. So first of all, let me talk about the Pixel 6 Pro design, because Google is doing something important here that they have failed to do with every Pixel since the beginning. For the first time, this Pixel feels like a phone that was designed to be unique and look different from the plethora of other phones out there. Like, the first two Pixels were kind of like an Android version of an iPhone. It looked very similar to the iPhone. I don't know what went wrong with the Pixel 3 XL, but it looked like a iPhone 10 you'd buy off Canal Street. The Pixel 4 XL design was more tame but forgettable, and the Pixel 5 looked very generic. The Pixel 6 Pro, on the other hand, looks radically different, and it has a distinct look to it. First of all, look at this giant camera bar on the top half of the phone. Like the iPhone 13 Pro, this design just screams, I am a camera. And the rest of the back is glass, and depending on your color, it could sport a different look. For example, my version is the sort of sunny color, and you get a two-tone finish with a lighter yellow on the bottom, and the top is kind of hard to describe. More of like maybe like a darker yellow, more of like a light peach color, and then with stainless steel gold siding, it looks pretty good actually. Like, holding it in my hand, it's pretty clear that this is the most premium Pixel phone that Google has ever released. And Google even said this was the first phone they considered that was a flagship phone for them. Turning over the Pixel 6 Pro, you can see the front is a 6.7-inch OLED display with a 1440 by 3210 resolution with 512 pixels per inch. The sides of the display kind of curve, so if you hold it at an angle, you can still see the display from the side, which can cause some frustration, as I've had quite a few accidental touches from the side of this display, especially when I'm putting the phone into my pocket. My palm kind of like brushes up against the side of the display, touches something I didn't mean to touch, and it's happened quite a few times to the point where I felt like I should note it. But the display is nice, videos and games look great on a 6.7-inch display, and the screen is fast and responsive. This is Google's first 120Hz phone, and it's actually an LTPO display, so it can actually ramp down the refresh rate, just as importantly to help save on battery life. However, I'm not sure how much Google is saving on battery life here, because in my week of using this phone, I would say I averaged around 6 hours of screen on time. That's not a bad number, by the way, and I reliably got to the end of the day with my Pixel 6 Pro with at least 10% more or remaining battery life. But for me, it isn't the best smartphone battery that I have tested, and I would expect a phone this big, like this is quite a massive phone, to actually have better battery life. So I was actually a little bit surprised it didn't get better battery life in my testing. But again, still perfectly fine. Can definitely get through a day of use with this. Going back to the display, navigating through the interface was very smooth, and it's where I noticed the 120Hz addition the most, and scrolling through content and websites seemed fast and responsive. Doesn't seem like Google was aggressively downshifting the refresh rate. Now, while this display seems flagship level at first, it does have one weakness: the brightness. The phone just really doesn't get all that bright for normal use, and after poking around tech pages, I believe the maximum brightness for this phone is only 500 nits. For reference, the flagship iPhone 13 Pro has double the brightness at 1000 nits, and even the regular iPhone 13 has a display of 800 nits of brightness. And this dimmer display was quite apparent to me even when using the phone on a cloudy day. The display also houses a fingerprint sensor, which for the most time I used the phone worked fine enough, and I unlocked the phone quickly. However, I also did notice in two conditions where the fingerprint reader did not work that well. first was on a cold day. The fingerprint reader just seemed less responsive, usually requiring me like 2 or 3 taps before it unlocked. And also when my fingers were damp. So I was actually taking some nighttime photos, as we'll get to later. It was raining, and even with just a little bit of moisture on my thumb, I could not unlock the phone reliably with the inbuilt fingerprint scanner. Still took me a couple of tries. So I really would have liked some version of face unlock here to go along with this fingerprint scanner. I do, however, like the haptics, and I really noticed this when using that fingerprint reader, and just throughout the entire system, it does feel precise when you press on the fingerprint reader and you feel the vibration, or you tap on another part of the display, and it feels like the vibration's right under your fingertips. So this is one of the better Android phones I've used when it comes to haptics. Speakers were also good. They got loud enough for me to enjoy watching YouTube videos, a lot of live streams, listening to podcasts, and I didn't feel like I needed to connect them to external speakers or wireless earbuds, but I was not a fan of the imbalance in the speakers, where I felt like the top speaker was just quieter. Actually, as I look at the phone, I don't even know where the top speaker is, so that's probably why. It just doesn't produce as much sound as the bottom speaker, and it kind of became apparent to me if I accidentally slipped my thumb over the bottom speaker when holding the phone in landscape. Now, this video is probably going to be long. I would have liked to spend a little bit more time talking about Android 12, but what I will say is there's a nice reskin here, and it kind of gives this more aesthetic look that personally, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of. Maybe I'll save Android 12 impressions for another video, because there's a lot to talk about with this, and I kind of want to speed along and get to the camera. But before we do that, I do want to point out that this is the first Google phone that's actually using their own chip, which they are calling Tensor. Now, Google was quick to point out at their presentation that benchmarks aren't everything, and I can see why they did that. Because the Google Tensor chip performs, let's be honest, it performs pretty weak in this Geekbench Benchmark, scoring a 1,036 in single-core score and a 2,760 in multi-core score. For reference, that's around the same power as an A12 chip from an iPhone from a couple years back. But in Android terms, the single-core benchmark is actually pretty high if I'm looking at Geekbench over here. But the multi-core score is kind of nothing to write home about. But like Google said, benchmarks are just benchmarks, and I agree with that, because I don't necessarily feel like the Pixel 6 Pro was slow in any area that I tested, except for photo processing, which we'll get to a little bit later. But for the most part, everything else on the phone was snappy, apps loaded fast, and I was able to play Call of Duty Mobile on the highest graphics settings. However, as we know, custom silicon is more than just performance, because the chip is so tied to just everything we do on the phone. And Google is saying that this year's Pixel, with its new Tensor chip and new camera hardware, will lead to significant boosts in not only photo, but video quality as well. Now, the Pixel 6 Pro is equipped with what Google says is a 50 megapixel wide-angle camera at f1.85, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera at f2.2, and a 48 megapixel 4x optical telephoto lens at f3.5. And I bet you guessed it, I'm comparing it to what I think is currently the camera king out there, the iPhone 13 Pro, which has a 12 megapixel wide-angle lens at f1.5, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide-angle lens at f1.8, and a 3x telephoto lens at f2.8. So here it is, the moment you've been waiting for, the camera tests and comparisons. This is what I was most excited for, because I walked into this really thinking the Pixel 6 Pro was going to amaze me. So starting off with the main wide-angle camera, I took some pretty simple pictures. Here's some kind of random pictures of food I was taking, just to make you hungry. And I thought that both the Pixel 6 Pro and iPhone 13 Pro did good jobs here. I would say the major difference between these photos is just color balance. The iPhone leans warm in white balance, where the Pixel 6 is cooler in the white balance. If you were to ask me to pick a winner, I think I would give a slight edge to the iPhone 13 Pro, because I think the warmer tones for food make the picture look warmer, letting the natural color of the pastry pop a little bit more than the Pixel. But I think depending on your photo preference, you could end up choosing either of these phones as the better photo set, and I don't think you would be wrong. I think it's whatever you prefer at this point. But that's a simple photo. So next, let's do a more complex scene, this time with indoor and outdoor lighting. This scene has much more dynamic range of dark shadows and bright highlights, and this one surprised me because the Pixel 6 Pro botched this one. It lost so much detail on the shadows of this photo and overexposed everything in the shadows to the point where everything except the outside is just noise. The iPhone 13 Pro with its smart HDR did this scene justice, exposing properly to light this scene and image. It's so clean and crisp compared to what you're getting on the Pixel. This really shocked me when I first saw it. So much so, in fact, that I immediately took a second shot on the Pixel 6 because I thought it was a fluke, but the Pixel 6 Pro still did not improve, and it still made the same mistakes as the last photo. So the iPhone 13 Pro really shines in this photo example. For landscapes and diffuse cloudy lighting, both phones did really well. Again, these are examples where I think you could pick one over the other depending on your photo preferences. For this fountain photo, I was surprised that the iPhone 13 Pro had a bit more contrast to it, as I usually find that Pixels have more contrast. And it just made the fountain pop more, where the Pixel 6 Pro just looked a little flat. But again, I think both of these pictures are pretty good. Maybe it depends on your style preference. This one is a good example where Google's processing works well. I found with the Pixel 6 Pro photos, they usually tended to have just a bit more contrast and sharpening than the iPhone photos. For a subject like a building, it makes those black lines much more distinct, where on the iPhone, I just thought they didn't pop out as much. However, this aggressive processing can also go too far, especially on human subjects. So the Pixel 6 Pro constantly over-sharpened my face to the point where you could see every single imperfection magnified, from my stubble to my pores to my redness. I don't need a reminder, Google. I feel like the Pixel 6 Pro aged me by 20 years in this photo. Like, I swear, I don't actually look that bad like how the Pixel photo is making me out to look. The iPhone photo looks more accurate to me, and it's more flattering. I can see what the Pixel 6 Pro is going for. I can see how people might prefer it as a better photo. But for me, it's way too harsh. There's way too much sharpening in the face. It looks super overprocessed. And to me, I don't like that. Strangely enough, though, I sometimes preferred this increase in sharpness and contrast when using the front-facing camera. I think that's because the processing on the Pixel works better because of how much less detail both of these front-facing cameras capture. And I think that's why it works better. There's less detail, so it doesn't over-sharpen as much, and it does give a nice contrasty look that doesn't go too far. So for the front-facing camera, I found that I kind of like the processing here, but for the rear camera, I didn't. So it's kind of interesting. Some of these shots are also in portrait mode shots, and I think both phones do good on human subjects with portrait mode blurring out the background. I found the Pixel 6 Pro was better with objects though, and did a much better job blurring out this clear cup. Okay, let's talk about some of the other lenses here. So the Pixel 6 Pro has an ultra wide at what they say is 0.7x, a telephoto at 4x, while the iPhone 13 Pro has a 0.5x ultra wide and a 3x telephoto. So for the ultra wide on both cameras, I think they both perform pretty similarly in well-lit scenes. And again, it's a toss-up depending on how you like your photos processed or what color temperature you prefer. I think the real advantage here goes to the iPhone, though, for two reasons. First of all, it has a faster aperture, so in low light, it's able to capture more detail without having to revert to night mode. Secondly, Apple's ultra-wide angle camera can autofocus and give you a macro mode where you can get super close up and detailed shots where the Pixel 6 Pro simply cannot do this. So I think the clear winner for this lens, even though on a well-lit scene they can look similar, is just the iPhone 13 Pro for the low light performance, and because it's a more versatile lens with its macro mode. However, as for telephoto, this is where things kind of get interesting, because I think ultimately that I prefer the Pixel 6 Pro's 4x telephoto in almost every scenario when we are just measuring in how good a zoomed in photo looks. So Google obviously has a 1x advantage in optical range compared to the 13 Pro's 3x lens. So while on the 13 Pro you can only get up to a 15x zoom with the digital zoom on max, on the 6 Pro you can get to a 20x digital zoom. And every photo I took on the zoom lens during daytime, I would say that the Pixel 6 Pro pretty much has always won against the iPhone 13 Pro. However, I found that when you're shooting human subjects, 3x is a more natural focal length, where the Pixel 6 Pro zooms in a little bit too much on 4x, to the point where you can't actually use the 4x lens for portrait mode shots on the Pixel 6. And the Pixel 6 Pro zoom lens also suffers in more complex scenes. Remember that photo we did earlier where the Pixel 6 Pro had a ton of noise in the shadows? Well, we can see that replicated here as well on the Pixel 6 Pro's telephoto lens. It just loses all detail around the car and the bushes, and the iPhone 13 Pro does a much better job retaining detail with its 3x telephoto lens. I also noticed that when taking night mode shots on both zoom lenses, the iPhone 13 Pro captured more light and detail, which may have to do with the fact that the 13 Pro has a faster aperture at f2.8 compared to the Pixel 6 Pro's f3.5. So overall, I like the Pixel 6 Pro 4x telephoto better for daytime when there wasn't any low light issues, but sometimes the 13 Pro actually had the advantage when it was lower light, or when, again, you were dealing with a complex scene with more highlights and shadows. Speaking of night mode and low light photos, this is another area where I usually preferred the iPhone photos. On this pumpkin, I thought the iPhone 13 Pro just did a much better job exposing the scene where the Pixel 6 Pro looked kind of fuzzy in the middle. This night mode portrait mode shot on the Pixel 6 Pro made my skin tone look way too blue to me. And the portrait mode detection was actually worse at night mode, blurring out parts of my jacket where the iPhone 13 Pro didn't do that. To be fair to the Pixel 6, I thought it did make the jacket pop more in this nighttime photo, but again, I overall just prefer the way the iPhone photo looks, because if you have bad skin tones, it kind of doesn't matter. I also found that the iPhone didn't need to use night mode as much as the Pixel, and when it did, it was much faster at getting night mode shots, where the Pixel 6 Pro, you could be holding the phone for a few seconds more before it finished taking the shot. The night mode shots took quite a while. And also just processing the photo after, the iPhone was faster at that, where the Pixel 6 Pro could, sometimes you'd be waiting there for the photo to load up and all the details to snap into place. I kind of think that's where I thought the tensor chip would have a lot of improvement this year, but I'm just not seeing it play out. This feels very comparable to older Pixels where processing just took a long time. When I forced night mode on both phones, I thought this flower shot in the iPhone 13 Pro did a better job capturing the vibrancy of the flowers. For this photo, I think I prefer the Pixel 6 Pro's night mode shot on this doghouse. The contrast is a nice touch with these droplets of rain, and the red roof just pops. But to be fair to the iPhone 13 Pro's night mode, it's a more accurate representation of night because the sky is still dark, whereas the Pixel 6 Pro made it an unnatural blue color. Here's another example of the iPhone 13 Pro not needing to engage night mode. This is not night mode on the iPhone 13 Pro. The Pixel 6 Pro, it is night mode. It needed to use it to take this shot. Now, the iPhone 13 Pro just seemed to naturally capture more light, which I liked, but also you can tell with both phones, lens flares are an issue. So I found that both phones captured lens flares. They gotta fix that. Okay, there's also quite a few software tricks to both of these phones, so Google has quite a few new features here, like Magic Eraser and Motion Mode. Magic Eraser was one of the features I was really excited to try. It demoed really well at their presentation, and quite frankly, it's the feature I was most disappointed in. Magic Eraser is supposed to be able to automatically erase unwanted details from a photo, like maybe someone walking by in the photo, and when you're trying to capture a landscape, and you tap on him, or you could draw a circle around him and remove him, and it just doesn't work well enough. Google demoed this with near perfect accuracy, and every time that I used this feature, you could clearly see where this effect was happening, and it left behind a lot of imperfections. Luckily, this is something that could probably be fixed with a future software update or just future iterations of future Pixel phones. I think it's a good idea in concept. I hope they improve it. But for me, it's not good enough to use reliably. Other features like motion mode were actually pretty cool. I took this photo of a group riding their bikes, and I thought it was a pretty interesting shot that I couldn't have gotten otherwise on a smartphone camera. You can also do long exposure shots with this mode, which the iPhone 13 Pro can also do as well. I used the 4x and 3x lens for this photo, and I think both did a good job with long exposure on the waterfall. But the Pixel 6 Pro picture looks better here because, again, that 4x zoom in daytime photos usually has more detail than the iPhone's. To be fair to the iPhone, it has its own unique exclusive photo modes, and you can actually change the photo style, and also it has cinematic mode to blur the background in video, and that's not a feature that's on the Pixel 6 Pro. Speaking of video, this is where I found that Google's claims of catching up in smartphone video thanks to their new tensor chip to be an unfounded claim.
All right, we're here doing a test recording. This is on the Google Pixel 6 Pro using the main wide-angle camera. Got a waterfall in the background too, so we'll actually see if the microphone rejects that sound. And just see the overall video quality. I'll move around a little bit too. It's kind of like a dance we're doing together. I'll dance with you if you want. I don't mind. If you've got no one to dance with, I'll do it. It'll cost you a little bit of money, but I'll dance with you. All right, camera comparison time. This time we're on the iPhone 13 Pro. these phones both have Pro in the name now. That's kind of cool. So doing a video test here. Again, waterfall in the background. Same spot. You can tell you're smart. You got eyes. You can see all the visual cues. I'll do the moving around test again. I don't know if that's, maybe that's testing autofocus. I don't know. I'm not like a camera guru. Not gonna dance with you this time though, because my dance card's full. So we're done. This is a stupid joke. Cut. Please cut the camera now.
So smartphone video still looked flat and washed out compared to what I was able to get on the iPhone 13 Pro. I also found that low light video performed much better on the 13 Pro as well, and the Pixel 6 Pro just had a lot more noise, like we kind of saw in some of those earlier photo examples. The Pixel 6 Pro also still limits you to video modes when using certain lenses, so you can't do 4K 60 with the 4x telephoto lens and the ultra wide angle lens. All right, here is a test of the Google Pixel 6 Pro front facing camera. Also gonna walk around a little bit, test some of the stabilization coming out of the front facing camera if you're doing like a selfie style vlog video. No one does those anymore, so what's the point? But hey, we're testing it because, I don't know, I'm a cool guy. All right, same test. This time we're on the iPhone 13 Pro, and we're doing the same thing, 4K video from the front-facing camera. One thing I do like about the iPhone cameras better is that it does have better frame rate options for me, so I shoot in 24 frames per second. You can do that on an iPhone. On the Pixel 6 Pro, no 24 frames per second option, just has the 30 frames per second option. I don't know why. I don't know what the deal is with that. Like, why not? If you could do 30 and 60, you could do 24, guys. Come on. Overall, I think with the rear and front-facing camera, the iPhone is just better at video quality. It's really good. I think at this point, I can pretty much sum up my experience with both phones. And what I will say is, again, going into this video and looking at the hype and looking at the specs of the Pixel 6, I honestly thought I would walk away when going into this camera comparison telling you that the Pixel 6 is the new camera king. But to my surprise, I think the 13 Pro performed much more consistently and had a better user experience, and I preferred it in the edge case scenarios where I was really trying to test the camera. Also, the combination of photos and videos with the iPhone, it just gives it the win in my book. That's not to say the Pixel 6 has a bad camera. As I illustrated, in a lot of scenarios, the photos look almost identical, and in some scenarios it wins. And if you're watching this video kind of scratching your head thinking the Pixel 6 Pro took the better photos and you think I'm crazy, well, I wouldn't call you crazy either, because hey, maybe you like the processing decisions that Google made with their camera system over the iPhones, or maybe you just like certain features better, or you prefer the more detailed daylight zoom lens, and that might be more important to you than, say, something like macro photography. Either way, for me, I feel pretty confident giving the iPhone 13 Pro the win here. But hey, as an experience overall with the Pixel 6 Pro, I really like what Google has done here. This is the best Pixel that I have ever used. And let's acknowledge something here. The phone is $899, and if you wanted the same 6.7-inch iPhone 13 Pro Max, you would be spending $200 more at the same 128GB configuration. I think Google made a lot of improvements here to really separate this Pixel from the rest of the Android lineup, and if you prefer Android to iOS, I think I could definitely recommend this phone after my week of using it. With that being said, I still want to spend and give some more time with the Pixel 6 Pro, and I will probably give this phone a future full review video sometime in the future where we're not doing any camera comparison. So if you want to see that video, make sure you're subscribed, and if you like this video, be sure to give me a like. And hey, let me know what you think of the Pixel 6 Pro and the camera comparison we did between it and the iPhone 13 Pro, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone. This was a long one. Oh my gosh, I gotta edit this thing. Are you crazy? I'm not gonna make embargo.